Hi, welcome to this edition of the Revelation. We're doing a study. It's not in depth. We've told you that before if you've been watching it. If this is the first time you caught one of our episodes, we're doing a deeper dive and kind of covering the whole book. The promise from God is that there's a blessing if you read the book, and we are doing just a real brushstroke, hopefully enough to give you some information and maybe interest you a little bit in what you might find in the book of Revelation. Today, we're going to go to Revelation chapter 2, and we're going to grab verses 18 through 29. I'm not going to read all of that to you. I'm going to read part of that to you, and then I'm going to make some points and some thoughts out of it. And you can go back and read the whole passage if you want. But I will pick up in verse 18 because this is to the church in Thyatira, or Thyatira, okay? You can figure out how to say that best you can. I'll blow it, I'm sure. But it says this: write this letter to the angel of the church in Thyatira. This is a message from the Son of God, whose eyes are like flames of fire, whose feet are like polished bronze. I know all the things you do. I've seen your love, I've seen your faith, and I've seen your service, and your patience and patient endurance. And I can see your constant improvement in all these things. But this is the complaint against you. And you know, you got to hate it when you get to that part, because it says some good stuff, and then there's always that, this is what I have against you. You are permitting that woman, that Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet, to lead my servants astray. She teaches them to commit sexual sin and eat foods offered to idols. I gave her time to repent, but she does not want to turn away from her immorality. For me, when I look at that passage, it's a reminder that sometimes good and doing good stuff just isn't good enough. And you can ask the church at Thyatira that. I mean, they received the commendation that I talked about from Jesus, their deeds, their love, their faith, their service, their perseverance in verse 19. That's pretty awesome, right? I mean, if I were to say that about you, or you were to say that about me, those were good things. All of them good things. Jesus says so as well. This was a church that worked hard. They held on to their hope of Jesus in really trying circumstances. But then we also learned that they had one failure, or at least one major failure, that in one area overshadowed all the good that they had done. It seems like the church at Thyatira had everything except holiness. You'll go back, and if you are a student of the Old Testament, you'll remember in 1st and 2nd Kings the practices of Queen Jezebel. When she married Ahab, Jezebel brought pagan religion to Israel, and with it, every kind of immorality, idolatry, and corruption. And so apparently there is a woman in the church at Thyatira who, like Jezebel, was promoting wickedness, idolatry, encouraging believers to indulge in evil and immoral practices. And so this is what has set up the message that Jesus gives to them. In other words, their witness had become polluted, and that was the problem. As a result, if you keep reading through that passage, you'll discover that he warns that judgment is going to come about because of that. Apparently, this Jezebel in the church, if you keep kind of reading the context of the passage, had had time to repent, but she had not. And there were some in that Jezebel cult, if you will, that had time and opportunity to repent, but they had not. So it wasn't like this was a surprise. Because they had chosen not to, God knew their minds, he knew their hearts, and he wasn't happy. Judgment was coming. But if you keep reading on too, and I'm going to encourage you to kind of read through verse 29 of that whole section, he also then gives a message to those that hadn't followed after Jezebel. He reminded them, you serve God, you keep doing what you're doing. And then he also then selects one more person. That person who is the one who is victorious and does God's will all the way through, doesn't tarry, doesn't have the need to repent, has stayed with it. That's in verse 26. It says this: the one who's victorious and does my will to the end. In other words, he is saying, if you are an overcomer, if you are one who holds on to that holiness, if you're one that holds on to your witness and does not allow your attention to become distracted, you have done well. And then it ends at the verse 29, at the very end of chapter 2, with this phrase, whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. In other words, there is a sense of urgency to this. And so at the end of the day, this is a church that has allowed people, or someone in particular, to infiltrate the church, if you will. And even though they were doing a lot of good things, it's that idea that one bad apple might spoil the whole bunch. Or this one person has gotten in and now diluted and polluted the witness of this entire church. That says a lot to us about the company we keep. That says a lot to us about how easy that we can have a crack in our armor and things can begin to happen. It does remind us that even though the culture we live in tends to say that things are okay and it's not a big deal, this is a very haunting reminder that sometimes what the culture says is not a big deal is a big deal. Because in Thyatira, if you'd ask, these people say, well, this isn't a big deal because look at all the stuff we're doing. And they would rattle off the list. Jesus agreed. He rattled off the same list. But it didn't undo the fact that they had allowed themselves to slip, lose ground, and kind of fall under the influence of this one person that seemed to be taking them astray. And it had people choosing sides as to who to be with and who to obey and whose rules they were going to follow. You take good care of your testimony. You take good care of your witness. It does matter. As the book ends, or the chapter ends, it says, let all who have ears to hear, let them hear. We need to hear it. May God bless you as you study the book. Enjoy reading chapter 2, and then we'll pick up next time in our next edition and jump into a brand new chapter.